Hi, I'm Dr. Stan Steindl. Welcome to Compassion in a T-shirt. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Jonathan Davies, who's a postdoctoral research fellow at the Contemplative Studies Centre in the School of Psychology, University of Melbourne. He's a long-term meditator and meditation teacher, as well as a cognitive neuroscientist, researcher, and science writer. Among other things, he's done some fascinating research on people's usage of meditation apps, and he presented recently on this topic at the UQ Compassion Symposium. He's very enthusiastic about all things meditation, including compassion meditation. And so I bring you Dr. Jonathan Davies. Let's just kind of get into it. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about perhaps your work now, but maybe your life generally, depending on what you feel happy to do. But yeah, what's the story for you?
Yeah, so look, I'm a scientist. My training is primarily science, but I've had lots of side adventures. Like most good lives, I've kind of gone down some different routes over time. So I started at UQ. I did an undergraduate degree in science. So I started off in engineering actually, but then quickly realised I couldn't keep up with the drinking. So I switched to computer science.
Switched to computer science, radio.
Yeah, where there was a lot less drinking.
Okay.
And yeah, that really got me interested because at the time, computer science and programming was all kind of taking inspiration from the brain. And so I was getting very interested in computers at that point. And then, yeah, just as basically kind of just out of curiosity, I started taking some neuroscience courses and some human physiology courses to try and understand, okay, well, we're trying to create this computer brain based on the real brain. So what do we know about the real brain? And that really just triggered it triggered a whole new world for me. Basically, I started understanding the brain and how fascinating that was. And I effectively switched. So I ended up kind of majoring in computer science and neuroscience. And then I went on and did honors in neuroscience. And then that started taking me off down that path down neuroscience. And then further in life, I went off and did a master's degree in Canada in neuroscience, trying to understand pain and molecular targets for pain. But then I realized that so much of pain and how we understand pain is subjective. And so that kind of brought me around to psychology. So I ended up coming back to Australia, and after many years and a few more little side adventures, I ended up doing a PhD in psychology at the University of Sydney, which was just conferred this year. So I'm now a newly minted doctor. And
congratulations!
Thanks very much.
Not a small task, especially after what sounds like a lot of interesting study and actually that sort of computer science, neuroscience. That's fascinating. I mean, how tell us more about that kind of sort of the connections there, or like how much does computer science think about the brain or even the neuroscience of it all?
Well, look, I think it's come full circle now because as I was saying, they were trying to understand how the brain works so they could make a computer that works like the brain. Now I think with artificial intelligence, it's going the other way. The computers are telling us more about what our brains do. So and yeah, it's neuroscience is a very fascinating and interesting place, I guess, because it's very hard, like this idea between the brain and the mind. Like, first of all, is the mind all in the brain or is it more embodied? And can you look at can you use neuroimaging or neuroscience techniques to see thoughts, and understand consciousness? And there's obviously a lot of very broad things we don't know, right? So I think computer science is helping a little bit. Yeah, it became very interesting. It got to the point where the psychology, understanding the mind, kind of seemed more important in many ways than understanding the brain. But of course, these things all feed into each other. So a lot of what I do now, I work as a postdoctoral fellow at the Contemplative Studies Centre, as you know, at the University of Melbourne. And a lot of what we do is programming. So I guess those skills, like there's this convergence of these different fields coming in. So the skills that we've learned in computer science and neuroscience, they're all helping, and they're all kind of helping to put this puzzle together.
No, it's beautifully sort of integrated, even just at a very practical level. Like I really appreciate how, you're sort of bringing them together and creating kind of, things with the integration of the two. And then there's something at a more almost philosophical level. I mean, you touched on some of the big topics of the age, AI, mind, body, consciousness, all of those things are sort of big, fascinating topics. And I think there is a fascination with neuroscience, isn't there? Just generally, people are really curious about it and curious about, what we can learn and discover about the brain and how it works. And sometimes I notice that if you put neuroscience into the title of something, it attracts more attention. I don't know. It's a sort of a sexy topic a little bit, these days.
I think they've done studies showing that if you're writing an academic paper and you have neuroimaging in it, even if it's not very good neuroimaging, your study's more likely to be published. So
right.
I think that's another plus as well.
Yes, that's an interesting phenomenon. It's even in the research world. I was thinking of a recent YouTube short that I did, and it had the word neuroscience, and it seemed to attract more views than other shorts. So it's funny that it happens at multiple levels. You mentioned the Centre for Contemplative Studies. In amongst all of what you just described, what was your journey, I guess, more into mindfulness or compassion and meditation and so on?
So I came out of high school and I went straight into university and I started studying science, and that was all very interesting for the reasons I mentioned before. Since my late teens as well, I was also a pretty devoted meditator. So I was self-taught. I kind of got my hands on whatever books or resources I could find. Went to a few kind of community courses here and there, and you really kind of develop this strong kind of love and passion for meditation. And that kind of, I guess, triggered in some ways, kind of fed into my science career, and just understanding the power of the mind and the power of meditation and similar kind of mental tools for healing and transformation. And I guess at that point it was just kind of he was me meditating on one side and he was me as a scientist on the other side. And I never thought, well, what are the odds of ever getting to research meditation? It never occurred to me that the two could ever be married. And then I heard about the Mind and Life Institute, which is this group that a lot of your listeners probably will have heard of. So this was founded in the 1980s by an entrepreneur who was also a Buddhist, a neuroscientist, and the Dalai Lama, who was also a Buddhist, believe it or not. The idea was the Dalai Lama was very interested in kind of applying scientific technique and scientific principles to understanding Buddhist practice and that sort of thing. And then we had a neuroscientist, philosopher, and an entrepreneur Buddhist, and they all got together and thought, how can we create a dialogue and how can we foster this kind of community of contemplative science and contemplative research? And so that was the birth of contemplative research as we know it. So I started going to this. I think the first event I went to was a Mind and Life Europe event in Berlin. There was this really intimate place where there was, Mathieu Ricard was there, and I believe Sharon Salzberg may have been there as well. So, some of the real heavyweights. Dalai Lama wasn't there, of course, but some of the real heavyweights and big thinkers in the world of in the fields of contemplation as a practice and contemplation as a scientific study. And it was this real sense of community and purpose and striving to kind of bring these things to life. It was really spellbinding. So I continued going to these events, and then it kind of over time it slowly kind of dawned on me that actually I can make this a career. So then I started kind of learning a bit more, and that kind of led me to the PhD eventually. Where in Australia at the time there was there weren't really a lot of meditation researchers when I started the PhD, and so I ended up kind of applying different techniques. So I looked at pain, which I had a background in. So I was looking at pain and using meditation techniques to kind of start understanding how mindfulness meditation works for pain, because it's quite a well-known treatment for chronic pain and to a lesser extent for acute pain. But yeah, I kind of came into it through a different way. So it wasn't necessarily that it was I was doing meditation research, but I was doing it more under the guise of pain research. And then kind of by the time I was kind of getting into my PhD, I realized that Nicholas Van Dam, who's a well-respected American meditation researcher, contemplative researcher, had moved to Australia. And so I got in contact with him. And then, yeah, he was lucky enough to receive some funds to start the Contemplative Studies Centre, and then that moved on from there. So yeah, it's been a very interesting and fortuitous journey to come to. Meditation research, it was always you fly to America or fly to Europe and there are these amazing people doing wonderful things, and there was nothing happening in Australia. And now we have in Australia the largest contemplative research centre, one of the only two contemplative research centres in the Southern Hemisphere. Both are in Melbourne, and they're the only ones in the Southern Hemisphere, and they're actually probably the best funded and best resourced and best positioned to do the work that we're doing in the world at the moment. So we're just incredibly lucky to have that in our backyard. So yeah, I pinch myself sometimes to think how things have progressed since those times.
Yeah, there's a couple of things in all of that I'd love to sort of check in with you about and kind of go back to. The first bit is you as an adolescent. That always, I find that a curious thing. Like, and also, how might we engage with adolescents in and around meditation or mindfulness and so on? What was it for you, do you think? Like, how did you stumble across it, and really, it sounds like feel quite inspired by it all and get very engaged?
Yeah, it's funny. No one's ever asked me that question before. I think as an adolescent, I was quite curious about the world. I kind of had been exposed, lucky enough to be exposed to some people that thought differently or kind of had more of a spiritual. I grew up in a very I grew up in I would say very religious, but in a Christian upbringing. But then started questioning that as I grew older and didn't really identify with it too much. And then I guess I was just, as I started reading and observing around me, yeah, I started seeing that, the reality that I saw wasn't the reality that other people saw. And I started just questioning that and looking beyond that. And yeah, meditation just seemed like a very natural kind of thing to do. It's almost kind of this kind of innate thing that humans have done that our culture has kind of divorced us from in a way. So, when you kind of step back from things, it seems natural to kind of sit still and sit with oneself and to process things. Like, it seems like we have that innate capacity within ourselves. And yeah, I had lots of access to good resources around me. So I, learned some different meditation practices. And yeah, it was incredibly, it's funny. It was incredibly transformative, just to be able to kind of step back from who I thought I was and to see things in different ways and to see the kind of the wisdom, the embodied wisdom that I had within myself or that I have, had around me, and just the sense of connection. Like, everything became more vivid, and the depth of connection to the environment and to to everything around and to other people. It was just, yeah, it was quite an eye opener, and I think that just really fed forward. So yeah, the more benefit I saw from that, the more I wanted to go deeper into it. But yeah, I guess, what do they say, when the student is ready, the master appears? I think with adolescents, it's very hard. Like, some of them just aren't interested. I've got two small children, and I try and expose them to meditation where I can, because I know it's been important to me, and they couldn't care less at this stage. But then, they're very present and mindful in their own ways anyway. So why do they need it? And I think there was the very famous, the Myriad study in the UK, where they took mindfulness into schools to try and improve mental health and school outcomes, and they found that it worked very well for the people who liked it, and it worked terribly for the people who didn't. So I think there's that distinction where, you know, if people are interested, yeah, the resources are available, but when they're not, maybe something else, maybe sport's better or something else.
Yeah, that's there was a curiosity, I guess, in you. You sort of were a little bit searching, and the discovery of meditation just kind of resonated, I guess. It really made sense to you and created self-discovery, and you started to really understand yourself more or differently, and then the transformation, kind of came out of that. I remember when I was in grade 11, it was man's search for meaning, I suppose, and then I got into more of the existential sort of theory and even the humanistic stuff, and so that was where my little 15 or so year old mind went as well. But for you, yeah, that is an interesting point, that it does depend on the person and what kind of their interests are, what grabs them. It might be sport or it might be other things, but and then that really persisted, because it sounds like the Mind and Life Institute stuff, that was kind of parallel to your other educational, academic sorts of pursuits. It was happening in parallel. It was very interesting to you. You put a lot of, I guess, time and effort and money into sort of attending those sorts of things, but it was at that stage still kind of separate to the more academic journey.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it was very parallel for a long time, but I guess there was the neuroscience, there was, as we were saying, the neuroscience angle attracts a lot of people. So I was studying neuroscience and, doing my core work there and doing my assignments. And then in my spare time, I was reading about the, neuroscience and the brain and just kind of seeing some of these things that were being done elsewhere. So yeah, I guess something that it reinforced my learning, but in a very kind of compartmentalized kind of way, I guess. Yeah.
I went to a summer research institute once with Mind and Life. I was lucky enough to go, and yes, it is very inspiring to get together with like-minded people, but also people coming from all sorts of different perspectives and angles to understand the contemplation and what it is or means, or how to sort of further all of that.
It's an incredible community, and in academia, often a lot of fields are very competitive and quite aggressive. Like in some ways, academics aren't very nice to each other, and there's a lot of argy-bargy and kind of ego and competition. And you just don't see that in contemplative research. I mean, it may exist at a very subtle level, but you go in and there's just this real sense of collegiality and support and real genuine authenticity amongst people, which is really refreshing to see as well. So it's nice to be in that supportive community. These people that are all kind of striving to kind of lift humanity up and make the world a better place, and alleviate suffering in individuals and societies. And yeah, it's wonderful. I've never seen anything like it. I didn't go to a summer research institute, but Mind and Life offered one international research institute, which was in Kyoto in Japan, and it was situated in this Myoshinji. It was this ancient Zen monastery complex, and we had the faculty were Zen priests, I guess, or Zen leaders, and so we're getting guided through these Zen walking through Zen gardens and sitting, and just incredible experience. And then we got hit by a typhoon, which was also an experience.
Oh, you did get hit by a typhoon?
Yeah, we did. We had to hide out in this kind of concrete hotel nearby. So yeah, it was this very kind of profound kind of inner experience amongst this kind of turmoil. It's like a metaphor for life in some ways. Kind of
yes,
this stillness, this calm amid the storm. Yeah, it was very interesting.
That is really interesting, and the metaphorical kind of the symbolism of it all is profound by the sounds of it. The summer research institute I did was, I can't remember the name of the actual venue, but I think it's where they hold it. You might know where they hold it, sort of.
Oh, Garrison.
Yes, Garrison. Thank you. Yes,
yeah.
Exactly, Garrison Institute, and that's up the Hudson River, I think, sort of thing in New York State. and across the river is West Point. So every now and then you'd hear these cannons kind of sort of as you're sitting there quietly noticing your breath.
War and peace. War and peace across the river.
Across the river. So there was some interesting kind of contemplation that arose out of some of that as well. But so you're now at the Contemplative Studies Centre.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your work at the moment? What are you focusing on these days?
Well, look, we are so the Contemplative Studies Centre I was mentioning, it was founded in 2021 by a philanthropic donation from Martin and Loretto Hosking. So Martin Hosking is the founder of Redbubble, a kind of an online business, and his life has been transformed as well, like many people's has, by meditation. So he was really moved to provide a gift to get us going and to start understanding these things. And so, research funding is the limiting factor, the rate limiting factor for most researchers. But we have we've got lots of resources, and we feel like there's kids in candy stores. Like we can basically answer an infinite number of questions, only limited by our own capacity and our needs to sleep sometimes. So we're doing some really fascinating stuff at the moment. So we're looking more or less across three streams. So one of the streams is the personalization of meditation. So meditation has changed and morphed over the years. So it started from you'd go and become a monk or a nun, and you'd devote multiple lifetimes to refining your practice and achieving enlightenment. Of course, not many people these days have multiple lifetimes to devote to a practice like that. So of course it's been condensed down to 8 weeks. So it started with the mindfulness-based stress reduction, and even 8 weeks. 8 weeks is too hard these days. We're living in the Twitter age, or TikTok or whatever we're up to now. So the programs are getting shorter and shorter. We can't all do face to face, so they're becoming online. And now you can have a meditation app on your smartphone. So, and this is all great. Like it's in theory, it's fabulous. Like do you get the same benefits from doing a 5-minute meditation on an app than you do from spending multiple lifetimes sitting in a monastery? Well, these are the sorts of things we're trying to understand, because if you read the literature, or if you go to a website of an app or any other program, you get these glowing testimonials and reviews and millions of downloads, and you'd think, well, look, this is a great product. There's scientific studies, but if you look closely at them, are they good? Is it good science? Is it compelling? Is it replicable? There's lots of questions around this, and yeah, so basically, like we're trying to understand all these factors, like the enthusiasm, which is great, and I love meditation. I'd love to see everyone meditating that wants to do it, and I'd love to see everyone getting the benefits. But you've got to be giving people things that are effective, that are tried and tested, and that are helping them achieve the goals that they want to achieve. And if you want a 5-minute chill out, or you want to get to sleep easier, yeah, maybe an app's great. But if you're looking for lasting, mental health benefits or other benefits or other transformations in your life, maybe you need to do a bit more. So yeah, a lot of the work we're doing is really trying to understand some of these nuts and bolts, really fundamental stuff. Like which practices are the most effective, and for what? Do they work for everyone? Do they work for certain people? Just real fundamental kind of stuff. Like the more we look into things, the knowledge that we've gained over the years from meditation research, the foundations aren't necessarily as good as they need to be. So a lot of it's just kind of trying to put foundations or evaluate some of the claims that are being made. So yeah, we're doing things like particularly dose response effects. So what dose of meditation and what context you need to deliver it to get a certain benefit. We're looking at things like comparative effectiveness, as I was saying. So does face-to-face work as well as online? What factors are involved in apps, and how apps work? Do they work? And a lot of it's also, we've got a very strong health economics focus as well. So we're obviously understanding okay, so are these programs working for people? Are they delivering the outcomes that people need them to, or that are beneficial for people? And second of all, if we're using these things increasingly in health and medical contexts, are they value for money? Like, are they saving users money? Are they saving the healthcare system money? So some of these things are really fundamental questions, and there's very, very little health economic evidence around some of this stuff as well. So, obviously, if if a meditation app works, but the benefits are small and the costs are high, if the costs end up being lower for an 8-week MBCT course overall, and it delivers more benefit, then we should be putting our money into MBCT courses and not into mindfulness apps, if you know what I mean. So some of these questions, we really need some evidence behind them. I can take a pause now if you want to respond to that. Otherwise, we've got 2 other big programs that I could talk about.
Well, I am fascinated by this. You delivered a presentation at the recent UQ Compassion Symposium that I think was offering us a little taster of some of the findings there. I mean, it is very interesting. There is a lot of enthusiasm for it. There are millions of downloads, but I think your point there was what happens next, I guess, after the download, because that's not quite the that's not the end of the story. And is that the best sort of outcome measure, really? That people, how there's the user kind of side. How does who are the users? What are their characteristics? What might we learn from that? There's the app side, which is the kind of like, is the app engaging people? Is it sort of user friendly? Is it effective? And then there's the sort of health economic side, like what's the bang for our buck, I guess, is, if that's not too crass a way to say it. But yeah, any sort of little highlights there? We'll come back to those other 2 areas in a sec. But yeah, what are the highlights there with the apps and your findings?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so we did, along with a colleague at the centre, Julia Adams. So she's a master's student, so she was presenting as well. So this work was, understanding. So basically, we know that apps are really, really popular. So if you ask most people, like, we've done surveys where we asked meditators broadly, how do you practice? And very few of them practice face-to-face with the teacher. A lot of people practice unguided, as I started out. I think a lot of people have that way of going about things. And a lot of people access kind of things like audio or video resources that outside of apps. So, things like YouTube or other places. So that's all great. But then, of course, probably I think we found about 25% of meditators use apps. And, that's a lot of people, right? Because I can talk about this more later, but yeah, we're probably in Australia. It's like some new data that we've got coming out show that probably about 1 in 3 Australian adults have tried meditation in the past 12 months. In America, it's probably about 1 in 5 adults. So, quite a substantial number of people are engaging with these practices. We don't know. We actually know next to nothing about how they're engaging, whether they're doing it once, as a one-off, or whether they're engaging more. So this is what we're trying to understand, is like, how are people engaging with these practices? And particularly with apps, there was this influential study in 2019 by a researcher from Israel called Amit Barmel, who was actually a computer scientist, and he was interested in app downloads and understanding kind of apps. And so what he did is he took I'm not sure exactly where he got the information from, but it was kind of objective use data about apps, and first of all, who was downloading them and who was opening them, who was engaging with them. And basically what he found was that about 85%, so lots and lots of downloads. And of course, meditation apps fall, he was looking more broadly at mental health apps. So, but if you look at, he had like a sub-analysis of meditation apps, and the patterns were largely the same for all apps. But basically what he found was that huge numbers of downloads, like millions and millions of downloads. And if you look at the people that download these apps, 85% of them don't even open it. They download the app to their phone and it sits there, never gets open. So the first thing that's telling you is, okay, so download our app. It's got the most number of downloads. It means nothing. It means nothing at all, because most people don't even open it. They don't even open it. And then they looked at the people that did open it. They looked at those, so that was the remaining 15%, and they found that, I have to look up the numbers again, but it was somewhere of the order of about 10% of people would open it once, so they would stop using it. Yeah, so it turned out that the majority of those people, so about 12% of those people, so 85% didn't open it at all, 15% opened it. Of the 15%, 12% of those people disengaged from the app within 30 days, and they found this curve where basically starting from day 1 down to day 30, the vast majority of those people dropped off use within 7 days. So they might have used it once, maybe twice, then they stopped using it, and then that just decreased over time. And then you've got the remaining 3% of those people that downloaded an app that engage with it for more than 30 days. And so clearly we're asking, all right, what's going on? Like, why how can you predict who's going to engage? How do you get to those 3%, or how do you make that 3% 4%, 5%, or more? Like, clearly some people are downloading these things and they have no intention of using them, and that's fine. They don't have to. But obviously people are presumably downloading these things because they'll have some sort of benefit. So what can you do if you're an app company? What can you do to make people grab onto these things more and get more benefit out of them? So we started kind of unpacking that and understanding that. So we did this survey, which was an international survey. We looked at app meditators. We had to screen a lot of people to do this, but we needed to find people that had used an app downloaded and used an app within the last 180 days, so the last 6 months, and had used it one or more times, basically. So we screened really extensively. We had a lot of people from the US, a lot of people from the UK, a few people from Australia and New Zealand, and a few people from Canada. So all English-speaking countries, places where meditation apps are fairly ubiquitous. We ended up with a sample of just over 500, I want to say 500 people in the survey, and basically we found very, very similar results. So we basically found, similar to the Bommel study, we found that a lot of people had used it once, twice, 3, 4 times within about a week or two that disengaged completely. And then we had the 3% that had kind of used more consistently. And we verified this, through a range of, we asked people how that engaged with it a number of different ways, and we also looked at screenshots. We made them supply screenshots so we could verify their app statistics, all sorts of things like this. So it was a really comprehensive study. And yeah, then we asked them a lot of questions. We asked them, sociodemographic questions, and we asked them personality, and we asked them, all sorts of questions about factors that might influence engagement. So things like expectations of benefit, their perceptions of the app, what app they were using, what they thought of the app. We measured something called therapeutic alliance, which as a psychologist, you'd probably be aware of, this idea that psychology works in part because of the treatment itself, but also in part because of the therapist and the relationship between the therapist and the patient. And there's this speculation in the field that apps, because they don't have a therapist and because they're kind of more asynchronous, that they may be less effective because there's less of that relationship. So we're trying to unpack some of these factors as well. And yeah, it was really, really interesting what we found. Like we found, and we measured things like self-compassion, the sorts of things that people were, what people did when they were in an app, when they, what time of day, all sorts of stuff, like really comprehensive. One of the first things we found, which was really, really interesting, was we measured people's levels of self-compassion, and we found people that had higher levels of self-compassion were more likely to engage with an app. Which is really interesting, right? Like it's, how and we don't have a good explanation for that. We looked, when we kind of talked to people a little bit more, and there's this other idea that compassion practice, like a lot of meditation practice, you can learn by sitting down, listening to a recording. But there's this kind of this notion in the field that compassion, it's more of a heartfelt thing, like it's a transfer of compassion or metta or whatever from a teacher directly to a student. And so that, some people would say that it works best when the teacher and the student are there, and that there's that flow of compassion from one to the other. And some people would argue that even that's the only way you can really impart compassion on people is by direct transfer. So does this work as a digital intervention? No one knows, right? And so we asked people as well, like, okay, so you meditate using an app, given 100% of your practice, how much of it is, mindfulness, is it focused attention on the breath? Is it attention on body? Is it compassion? What are you doing in your practice? And we found that overall, let's see, for most people, so the average across all meditators, app meditators in our study, probably about 3 to 5%. Yeah, okay, so the median, so for the majority of people, compassion meditation was less than 1% of their app use. The average, I think, was closer to 5%. And then the maximum we found, the maximum people that used a lot of compassion in their practice, the maximum was about 20%. So it's really low, right? Like you sort of think compassion has so many benefits for so many people. We know that. We've done the studies, and we know that compassion is really, really beneficial to people. But it's not being delivered. Either it's not being delivered, and there are compassion apps in the App Store, but we looked at of these 500 people. We asked them what app they're using. Not one of them was using a compassion app, and so they're relying on compassion resources that are in other apps. And there's just a really limited amount of those in other apps. But then you sort of think, okay, well, if self-compassion can be taught, it can be trained. And we know that self-compassion predicts engagement with apps. And yet the apps don't include any compassion training in them, which would actually help support their business model. If they had compassion in the apps, people would use their apps more, and the app companies would make more money, and they'd be able to help more people. But they don't have them. So it's this really, like, some really interesting findings that we're discovering through this research. Really, really fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. A lot of people download apps. A small number of them open them, and an even smaller number of them use them and persist with them. But there's this little kind of sort of fascinating finding that somehow self-compassion is in the mix. Maybe that actually opening and using an app might, in a funny sort of way, be self-compassionate action. That people are doing it from a self-compassionate motivation, perhaps, but also the app itself might be able to further enhance that or further support cultivation of self-compassion. But not many apps do it. Not many apps focus on it, and it's sort of like a very interesting opportunity to feed back to app developers, say, or that sort of thing, because it might actually help to enhance the users or the usage, I guess, of these apps as well, to have that more compassionate, self-compassionate aspect to sort of the practices on the app. So
and I mean, don't forget also that there's been a lot of focus on kind of this mindfulness, and these app companies are just trying to make more money, and there may be an element of that, but and obviously the more people engage with their app, the more successful their app is, and the more money they make, which is, and if they're making money by helping people, we know there's dose response effects for these things, right? So the more you meditate, the more you use any sort of product, the more benefit you get. So, if you can use these things more and become more self-compassionate, if you can practice these things, you're getting the benefits. yeah, sure, the app company's making money, but they're also supplying a product that if it's working, that's great.
Mm.
But yeah, like the question is, like, no one seems to be questioning what's the most effective way of doing this. And if I go back to many years ago, I started practicing Vipassana meditation, and there's always this kind of focus on, all right, well, we're gonna go deep, and we're gonna kind of understand. We're gonna practice mindfulness, and then we'll do some metta. We'll do some compassion practice to kind of, I think Goenka talks about squeezing a boil and getting the pus coming out, and then the metta's the balm that soothes everything and heals everything. Which is a really, really graphic but somehow very effective metaphor.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think I remember going to doing many meditations in Vipassana where there wasn't a little bit of compassion at the end.
Mm.
And there's no reason that app companies couldn't do a 5-minute meditation and do a 30 seconds or a minute of compassion at the end. No reason. And I think we'd probably find that it's quite effective at engaging people.
Yes, it could easily, and almost kind of needs to be sort of woven into the practice, really. It is really a part of it, and that's one of the challenges with some of the more recent sort of versions of mindfulness or whatever, is that it kind of forgets the care and discernment aspect of what mindfulness has always been. It's always been kind of wisdom and compassion as really part of it.
And I think things will come full circle. Like we've been really, we live in a really reductionist system where it's like, oh, what's the active ingredient? How can we just give people the active ingredient and nothing else? But I think, we started with this really rich context where meditation was part of a spiritual practice, and you devote your lifetime to it or multiple lifetimes to it. Meditation was just one part of that, and there was ethics and community and all sorts of other supportive things around it. And then it kind of got reduced again to a psychological, a psychosocial group therapy kind of situation. And then it kind of got just further and further and further, and until it's just like a mental training. Like, if I just do 3 minutes of mental training, is that going to make me a more ethical person? Is it going to make me more connected to people around me? No, well, I mean, you're sitting on your phone. Of course it's not. So I think people will start eventually realizing that those aspects are missing, and they'll start, they'll start kind of, these things will become palatable again, I think. At least I hope they will.
Well, it sounds like you're leading the charge. So that's a good part of that. And I must admit, I was thinking that even if 1 million people download an app and only 3% use it for 30 days or more, that's still, if my maths are right, 30-odd thousand people engaging with it. So it sort of trickles down to still rather large numbers, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. And look, and I guess, I mean, we haven't hit peak mindfulness yet. Like, I think there's been a lot of hype, a lot of enthusiasm, and it's grown very steadily. So we did a study another study where we looked at American health data. So I talked about this at the Compassion Symposium as well. So this the National Health Interview Survey is it's like the census of health in America. So every year they interview about 80,000 people, and they get a representative sample of all adults in the US population. They understand their health situation, their healthcare access, and all sorts of things. And they talk about their, every 5 years they talk about, so they use meditation or yoga or other things. And so we did an analysis on this recently, and we found, at the moment, so 1 in 5, the stats are about 1 in 5 American adults have used meditation in the past 12 months. And that equates to, I think it's somewhere in the vicinity of about 50 million American adults. It's a huge number of people. And it's growing year on year. So it's growing 0.5% per year, which doesn't sound, 0.5% at a population level is actually quite a lot. So it's about 10,000 new users a year. So some really, really strong growth in meditation. And across gender, across socioeconomic strata, across race, across age, like just very consistent growth across most strata of society. So really useful. But I think I was also we did another study, so we wanted to understand kind of meditation use in America because we know a lot about America. So we did. So I told you we know that 1 in 5 American adults practice meditation, have practiced meditation in the past year. So what if we looked at a representative sample of those meditators based on, okay, so that one person in 5, what do they look like? And if we get a big sample of those people, what can we understand? And so we looked at this as well, and we looked at 3 different types of meditation. So for a couple of years, the NHIS survey was looking at mindfulness meditation, mantra meditation, and spiritual meditation. And so we looked at meditators from those, and they're very arbitrary categories. You could, what is spiritual meditation? It's But anyway, we looked at them for what it's worth, and we looked at beginner meditators, intermediate meditators, and advanced meditators. And we're trying to understand, okay, so what do these people look like? What do they do when they practice? All these sorts of things. So we looked at, okay, so what is a compassion meditator? What do they look like? And we found that compassion meditators were mostly kind of considered themselves more spiritual. So they kind of identified as being spiritual meditators, or they identified meditating in a spiritual context. Religion-wise, they were either Christian, spiritual but not religious, or Buddhist, were the three biggest categories for compassion meditators. But the other thing we found was, again, and this ties into the findings before, their use of the way they get their meditation, they actually use apps less than other meditators. So people who practice compassion are less likely to go to an app to get it. They're more likely to get it from somewhere else at the moment. And the other thing we found was that amongst beginner meditators on average were a lot less likely to use compassion practices compared to intermediate or advanced. So whatever it is, I don't know whether it's what the offerings are or the way it's taught, but when you're starting out as a meditator, you're not getting compassion practices. Those practices, well, some people are, but a lot less than other practices that are available. And then once you become more experienced, maybe people value it more, or it's part of a lineage or something, but they're starting to practice compassion a lot more as they kind of advance in their meditative life. So yeah, some really interesting findings there as well, and we're trying to all understand that as well. So I'll leave it there so we can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. The those who are more perhaps spiritual, those who are perhaps more experienced, those who are perhaps more face-to-face, that's where compassion meditation really starts to become a more significant part of the practice. I noticed you mentioned earlier, well, you mentioned just then 1 in 5 Americans, but you said earlier 1 in 3 Australians. Is there something that you've worked out with that? Because that seems like a bit of a difference, I guess, in a way, but maybe I'm overstating it.
Yeah, so we've started off looking at America because there's comparatively more information available, and obviously we're in Australia, Australia and New Zealand, particularly our backyards, and we want to know what's going on. Like, if people, we would, for better or worse, we often, kind of model ourselves after America. So is it 1 in 5? Like, are we engaging with these things the same amount, or is it different? And so we just a couple of months ago, we started the first that's ever happened nationally representative survey of Australia and New Zealand. So we take a national, as we use the census, and we target people based on representative sample of the Australian census and the New Zealand census, and we ask those people a bunch of questions about their health, who they are, and their use of contemplative practices. And so we're asking about meditation, but we're asking about contemplative practice more broadly. So have you ever done anything in the last 12 months? Have you done anything in a contemplative way? So with deep thought, like contemplative gardening or yoga or tai chi or you name it, just trying to understand whether people have some sort of contemplative practice in their life at all. data collection is ongoing, but I do have a little bit of stuff I can talk about now. So what we found was actually quite staggering. So we found that almost 3 out of 4 Australians, I don't have the New Zealand data, sorry, I can only talk about Australia, but about 3 out of 4 Australians have engaged with some form of contemplative practice in the last 12 months, which is like a really, really, really high level. And, you know, for some people, that's different for everyone. Like for some people, that's taking a bath and doing that in a contemplative way. For some people, it's gardening. Some people, it's going for a run and, you know, just really being immersed in that run. So, but it's a really high number. It's what I think it speaks volumes about, you know, what people are looking for in their lives. You know, we're finding a lot less people in the same survey. We're finding a lot less people are engaged in organized religion, but they're really wanting something that kind of connects them to themselves and grounds them and connects them to the world around them. And so this is where, you know, contemplative practice is coming in. And so that's 3 out of 4 Australian adults engaging in some form of contemplative practice in the 12 months. And at a population level again, 1 in 3 people are meditating. So about 33% on those. So this is trying meditation in the past 12 months. So again, we don't know. We have collected data on this, but you know, for some people that will be, I downloaded the Headspace app and I used it once. And for some people that will be, I do an hour's meditation a day and I go to retreats. So we don't know yet where that. Once the data collection finishes in a couple of weeks' time, we'll be in a chance. We'll have an opportunity to unpack this a bit more. But like, so 1 in 5 Americans compared to 1 in 3 Australians are using meditation. So go Australia.
Yeah, Aussie, or something. All right, I there's so much more we could dive into with that bit, but I know that you had 2 other areas that you sort of wanted to mention in terms of the work there that you're doing at the centre. Can you give us a sense of those bits as well?
Well, Stan, you'll be pleased to know that I've already Trojan horsed them in a little bit for
okay
for the sake of time. So yeah, so one of them is, the third one is just kind of mapping the landscape. So we've done a series of broad survey studies where we just don't know. Like there's so much, you know, there's been lots of like even for compassion research, there's been about 120 randomized control trials. So, you know, this is where you do a study where you have a compassion intervention, you have a control intervention of some sort, you randomly allocate people to it, and then you see whether one condition is better than the other. So it's compassion superior to no treatment or some other treatment. And so we've had about 120 of those over the past kind of 20 odd years, which is good going, right? And, you know, you can learn a lot from RCTs. They're the gold standard in medical practice. So, you know, in terms of the hierarchy of evidence, you know, randomized control trials are the way to go. They're great. But what we don't know is, you know, this high level stuff. So you get this kind of, they call it an RCT, a randomized control trial, a tactical strike. So if you want to know, okay, is compassion effective at increasing well-being in medical students? So you get medical students, you randomize them, you give them compassion, you measure well-being, and then you say, yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. So you test a very specific question and you get a very specific answer. But we don't know, like, more broadly. And so, and one of the criticisms of randomized control trials is, okay, so is it generalizable? So if I gave this compassion to engineering students who are drunk all the time, would it work the same? Or if I gave it to, you know, octogenarians or someone else or people in a hospital, would it work the same? And you can't generalize these things because you don't have what's called a sampling frame. A sampling frame is when you kind of look at the whole population. I mean, in the ideal world, if resources were unlimited, you'd recruit everyone in Australia and everyone does the intervention, and then you get robust data because you know it's generalizable because everyone's done it. But of course, that's not feasible, right? Imagine the scheduling would be horrendous. So what you do is instead you get a sampling frame. So you say, okay, so in Australia, we know that 1 in 3 adults meditate. We know that half of them are male, half of them are female. We know that a third of them are 25 to 34 years old, the other half are, and so you can work out, okay, so if I had a sample of 100 people in my study, how many 45 to 64-year-olds do I need? How many males do I need? How many females do I need? What are the other factors that I need to consider? How many kind of European origin people do I need? How many African origin people do I need? Like all these questions. How many Indigenous people do I need? So, until you know who's using these practices, and unless you know what you're dealing with, it's really hard to kind of generalize these findings. So yeah, we've done that obviously with the with this population level data, which is what that really excels at. So we've looked at the American data, the NHIS survey, and we've also done some follow-up studies with meditators, like a representative sample of meditators, and also with app users. And now, of course, we're bringing that to Australia. So I've talked about most of that now. The other thing that I didn't mention about the Australian study is that so 1 in 3 Australians have meditated in the past 12 months. 1 in 6 meditators in Australia practice compassion. So that's a very, comparatively small amount. So I think there's a good thing we're doing podcasts, and I think good thing we're spreading the word a little bit more, because I think maybe we need to increase the outreach a little bit. So this is the real benefit of once you know that, once you have this data in front of you, you can say, wow, we need to do more work here, or maybe what happens if we introduce more of this here? What would the change be at a population level? And you can start to see these things change over time. Or you can say to the government, we really need to be teaching compassion in schools, or we need to be doing this or that or the other. And you can actually start making some recommendations, and then seeing over time, in 3 years' time, we've put a big public health intervention into place, or is it cutting through? Are we getting the results we're expecting? So this is the real benefit of this work that we're doing.
Yeah, that seems to be a recurring finding, really, about the usage of compassion meditation, as opposed to, as a specific, I guess, form of meditation, as opposed to other things that people might be doing, such as mindfulness and so on. So that is a really interesting opportunity, I guess. That's what you're saying, I think, is that having this data and this understanding at more population levels gives us some clues about where we can put our efforts, maybe, or what the opportunities might be. Just for the sake of perhaps the listener, like, how would you sort of name each of these 3 areas that you were wanting to, or that you've been talking about? Like, are there kind of just so that we can kind of orient to the things that your centre's doing?
Yeah, so the first one I was talking about was kind of understanding, the nuts and bolts about how meditation works and the health economics. That's we call it personalized meditation. So kind of understanding how meditation kind of works for the person, for the individual, and whether there are differences in what works for whom. So it's personalized meditation. The second one I was talking about is kind of what we would call kind of mapping the landscape, or mapping the territory. So just understanding at a big bird's eye view, what's going on, what's happening, it's the fundamentals of who, what, when, where, why, of meditation in Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere. Some really fundamental stuff but amazingly hasn't been looked at ever. And then the third one, which I haven't really touched on too much, is it's called we call it kind of progression experiences. So we're understanding, okay, in a traditional context, what or stages of insight or stages of progress. So if you start meditating very seriously, how do you know you're making progress? Is it just that your stress levels are going down, or you're sleeping better, or is it like, how do you know that once you've gone through got through one stage of meditation, what sort of things are you seeing in your life, or in your practice, or in your reality that indicate that you might have hit a certain milestone, you might be that one step closer to enlightenment, or whatever you're going towards. So this is kind of a quite a big effort that's being led by our Deputy Director, Julieta Galante, who some compassion researchers will know for her work with kindness-based meditation. So she's done some interesting work there. And so she's leading this, talking to a lot of practice experts, so kind of traditional practice communities and understanding, okay, so what are the stages that a person goes through, and how do you know, if this person turns up one day and says, this is happening in my life, or I was in my practice and I had this vision, or this happened, or something else. How do you know where they are on the path? So that's some work that's coming up as well. So yeah, those are three main things.
Great.
All this stuff's all this stuff's on our website.
Yes.
We've got so we can talk more about that later as well. I think we're starting to run out of time, aren't we?
Yeah, no, that's great. Me too. I mean, I think personalized practice, mapping the territory, and progression, kind of basically are the three main areas. I'll definitely include your website in the sort of the notes below. I think it might be good to put a link to Mind and Life as well. Perhaps that probably would be useful. I might also, if you wouldn't mind, maybe sending me some links to just a couple of those papers that you've perhaps mentioned as well, just so people can, look at some of your work, but you mentioned a couple of earlier studies as well. So that would be great. Given all of this, and given your research in these various areas, but maybe also your practice, personal practice as well, I mean, what would you recommend, for people, how to get started, how to keep going? I mean, do you have any little tips there for people on their meditation / compassion journey?
Well, look, I want to resist the urge to kind of give recommendations too much.
Okay.
For those who are in the audience who are parents, you'll be familiar with a lot of the parenting books that talk about. I'm a parenting expert because I had a child and this worked for me. So here's my 12-step plan about how to get your baby to sleep.
Yes.
And they're infuriating because it worked for your child, but your child's not like my child. So
Yes.
look, I think in many ways it's a very personalized journey. I think we're at the centre, we are working towards kind of having some recommendations. I think, probably the best way is just, follow your curiosity, but I think also, do something that's grounded in a tradition. There's lots of home-baked things that are available. There's a lot of things that have lots of claims and lots of downloads, but not necessarily a lot of evidence. So I think it's really important, if you're interested in kind of traditional meditation forms, there are some that have been around for millennia. They've been used by a lot of people. They've benefited a lot of people. Engaging with something that's tried and tested, maybe doesn't have as many scientific papers, but it's been around for a long time, stood the test of time. I think that's always a good place to start. So, MBSR has, it hasn't been around for millennia, but it's certainly been around for decades now. There's a good evidence base behind it. And it's a really good, safe way. The people that are often kind of, the instructors are often kind of trained both in contemplative practices, but also in psychological, mental health. So they can kind of guide you through. And if you kind of have any stumbling blocks, it's safe. It's very safe, and there's supports available if things go wrong. So I would say, probably starting there. I don't necessarily have anything against apps as a blanket rule. I think, if you've only got 5 minutes to throw at it, and you can get a 5-minute meditation in between, on the bus or before bed or whenever, then that's definitely better than nothing. But I wouldn't expect that an app would be your final destination as a meditator. So okay. I think there's lots of resources available. But the other thing is, reach out to the Contemplative Studies Centre. We have resources available. We've got a very active public engagement series. So we tend to get in meditation teachers from different lineages. So you can come and basically do a sampler. You can come and do a couple of weeks practice of Zen or movement-based meditation or compassion meditation or whatever it is, and see if you like it. And if you like it, then you can connect with the teacher from there. And we can give recommendations for that as well. The centre, everything's open, everything's publicly available. You can sign up for these things live when they happen. All our listings are up on the website. And we also have a very extensive now back catalogue of practices. So it's a really rich resource, stuff that's been around for a long time. You can try it, see if you like it. If you like it, then go deeper.
Does the centre have an app, Jonathan?
We don't. We're resisting the app so far, but we are. You know, we're very interested. We are interested in apps. It's, you know, we recognise that a lot of people are using them.
It's a way in.
So yeah. So yeah, we've got to be playing in that space as well.
Well, yes, it's a personal thing. It's a personal journey, I guess. But I suppose I did hear 3 kind of tips in what you were saying. That this sort of follow your curiosity, follow a tradition, and follow sort of some of the practice-based evidence and some of the evidence-based practice, I guess. And you know, those that all of that will sort of perhaps help you to discover what works for you. Well, I really appreciate all of that. I love your enthusiasm. I agree we could keep talking, but I suppose, you know, we better bring it to a close. So thank you very much for being willing to come on and have a chat about meditation. Thanks, Jonathan.
My pleasure, Stan. It's been wonderful to chat to you about it.
Good. Thank you.